The first thing Evelyn Harper noticed when they dragged her onto the platform was how quiet everyone got. Not the kind of quiet that meant respect, the kind that meant people were watching something they knew they shouldn't enjoy but planned to enjoy anyway. 40, maybe 50 men standing in the mud in front of Blackstone Crossing's single mercantile, hats pulled low, breath coming out in gray puffs in the November cold. A few women on the fringes, arms crossed, expressions caught somewhere between pity and relief that it wasn't them up there. She was 23 years old. She was holding her son against her chest with both arms, and Noah was 11 months old and didn't understand any of it, which was the one mercy she could find in the whole rotten situation. Debt obligation of $114, called Dale Pruitt, the county clerk, from the edge of the platform. He had a voice like someone stepping on gravel. He didn't look at her when he said it. He was reading from a ledger, and she was an entry in that ledger, and that was all. Property of the late Thomas Harper. Debt held by the Blackstone Crossing Merchants Cooperative. Per territorial law, said debt may be satisfied through indenture of surviving household members for a period not to exceed Just get on with it, someone called from the crowd. A few men laughed. Evelyn's arms tightened around Noah. He stirred against her, made a small sound, settled back. He was warm, at least. She had made sure of that before they came for her this morning, layered him in the heaviest wool she had left, strapped him to her chest with the length of canvas she'd torn from the feed sack. They'd come at dawn, 2 men from the cooperative, and they hadn't let her take anything except what she was already wearing. Thomas had been dead for 3 weeks. She hadn't loved him. She had known that for a long time, and she was tired enough now that she didn't feel guilty for knowing it. But she hadn't hated him either. He'd been reckless with money, careless with promises, a man who always believed the next venture would be the one that saved them. It never was. And now here she was, standing on a wooden platform in front of people she'd lived among for 2 years, and not one of them had thought to come around before it reached this point. Her neighbor, Agnes Birch, was standing near the back. Agnes had brought Evelyn a pie 6 weeks ago, after Thomas died, and said she was sorry and hadn't been back since. Opening bid, Pruitt called. We'll satisfy the debt obligation in exchange for 12 months of domestic service, terms to be negotiated with the winning party. Domestic service, that was what they were calling it. $20, someone said immediately. 25. Don't need to go that high, Theo. She's got a baby. 30 then. Evelyn kept her eyes on a fixed point above the crowd's heads. There was a ridge of mountains to the north, pine trees dark against a pale gray sky. She concentrated on those. She concentrated on breathing and on keeping her arms steady around Noah, and on not letting her face do anything these people could take satisfaction from. 45, said a man in the front. She knew him. Gerald Marsh, who ran the feed and grain. He was 60 years old and his wife had died in the spring, and the way he was looking at her made her stomach turn entirely over. 50, said someone else. She had played out every version of how this ended, lying awake the last 3 nights in the empty house with Noah asleep beside her. None of the versions were good. The best she could hope for was someone who needed actual domestic labor, a cook, a housekeeper, someone to manage a household, and who would treat the arrangement as the business transaction it was legally supposed to be. The worst she could hope for she had stopped herself from thinking about directly, because thinking about it directly made her feel like the ground was opening under her feet. $60. 65. Gerald Marsh hadn't dropped out yet. He was watching her with a kind of patient confidence, like a man who was used to getting what he bid on. 70. 80. She heard a murmur move through the crowd, the particular murmur that meant something was happening at the edges of the scene. People were shifting, turning their heads toward the far end of the main street. She didn't let herself look. She kept her eyes on the mountains. Noah made a small, hungry sound against her chest. She shifted him slightly, bounced him once, and he settled. Is that Cole Maddox? The name passed through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. She felt the ripple of it, the way men straightened slightly or stepped back, the way a few of the women near the edge moved without appearing to move. She looked then. The man riding toward them was not what she expected from that reaction. He wasn't enormous. He wasn't visibly armed, though she would learn later that he was. He was perhaps 35, lean in the way men got lean when they worked land for years instead of pushing paper. not thin, but stripped of anything extra. He was wearing a dark coat that had seen hard weather, and his hat was pulled low. And he rode like someone who was used to being watched and had decided a long time ago not to care about it. He pulled up at the edge of the crowd and just sat there for a moment, looking at the platform. The bidding had stopped. Pruitt hadn't called for it to stop. It had just stopped. The way conversations stop when someone unexpected walks into a room. "What's the total obligation?" Cole Maddox said. He wasn't projecting his voice, but it carried anyway, clear and flat, the kind of voice that came from years of giving orders that needed to be heard over wind and distance. Pruitt blinked at him. The total outstanding debt of the Harper estate is $114, but the bidding has already... I'll pay it." The murmur this time was different, louder. Gerald Marsh turned around to look at the man on the horse. "Bidding's already open, Maddox. You don't just ride in and..." "The purpose of the auction is to satisfy the debt," Cole said. "I'm offering to satisfy it in full, right now, cash." He reached into his coat, and Evelyn watched a dozen men go still, that specific stillness of men around someone they are not entirely sure about, and pulled out a folded envelope. "In coin, if Pruitt wants to count it." Pruitt looked at Marsh. Marsh looked like he wanted to argue, but something stopped him. Some calculation she couldn't quite see. Cole Maddox looked at neither of them. He was looking at the platform. At her. She made herself hold his gaze. She was not going to look away first. Whatever this was, whatever he wanted from this, she needed to see his face clearly, and she needed him to see that she was looking. His expression told her almost nothing. That was unsettling in its own way. "Terms?" Pruitt said carefully. "No terms for me," Cole said. "Debt satisfied, obligation discharged, woman goes free." A beat of silence. "That's not how the law reads," Marsh said, an edge of frustration working into his voice now. "There's protocol, there's procedure. Show me the statute that says a creditor can't accept full payment, and call it done." Marsh didn't answer. Because there wasn't one, apparently. Pruitt cleared his throat. "I would need to verify the funds." "Verify them," Cole said, and held out the envelope. It took 11 minutes. She counted them, standing on the platform with Noah, while Pruitt counted coins at the clerk's table they'd set up beside the mercantile, and the crowd stood around in the cold making the particular kind of noise that was technically not talking, but was absolutely talking. She could pick out words here and there. Maddox. Crazy. What does he want with her? Heard he was up at that ranch alone 3 years now. More. Heard what happened to... And then someone else's voice cutting that one off. She didn't move until Pruitt came back to the platform and announced in his gravel voice that the obligation was satisfied and the proceedings were concluded. Then she walked down the steps herself, without anyone's help, and she walked across the mud to where Cole Maddox was still sitting on his horse. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. "I don't know what you expect in return for this," she said. She kept her voice level. It cost her something, but she kept it level. "Nothing," he said. "Men don't pay $114 for nothing." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. Fair point. He looked at Noah briefly. Not the way Marsh had looked at her, not with any calculation she could identify. Just looked the way a person looked at a thing they hadn't expected to see. "I have a ranch, 11 miles north up the mountain road. I need someone who can cook and manage the house. It's hard work and it's isolated and the pay is room, board, and a wage." He named a figure. It was a reasonable figure. "If it doesn't suit you after a month, I'll bring you back down and put you on the stage to wherever you want to go. And if it does suit me, then you stay." She studied him. She was not naive. She knew that men said things and meant other things, and that what a person offered in a crowd in front of witnesses was not always what they pressed for in private. She knew that going to a remote ranch with a man she didn't know was dangerous. She knew all of this. She also knew that she had 40 cents in her pocket, a hungry baby, and no one in this crowd who was going to offer her better. "All right," she said. He nodded and dismounted in one clean motion, and for the first time she saw the slight hitch in his right leg when he landed. Something old, something set crooked or healed badly. He didn't acknowledge it, just tied his horse to the post and said he needed to get supplies before they left. And did she need anything from the mercantile? I need to know your name, she said. Formally. I know what people called you back there, but I'd like to hear it from you. He looked at her. Cole Maddox. Evelyn Harper. She shifted Noah. This is Noah. Cole looked at the baby again. Noah, with the unconscious social confidence of a child who had not yet learned that some people were frightening, reached out and grabbed the nearest thing available, which was Cole's coat lapel. Cole went very still. Noah pulled on the lapel, let go, grabbed it again, apparently finding this satisfying. He does that, Evelyn said. Yeah, Cole said carefully, and then he went into the mercantile to buy supplies, and Evelyn stood in the cold mud of Blackstone Crossing's main street and thought that she had absolutely no idea what she had agreed to. The road up the mountain was 11 miles, like he'd said, but 11 miles of mountain road in late November was not 11 miles of anything else. The first part was passable enough, say, a wagon track that wound north through the lower valley, bare cottonwood trees on either side, the town falling away behind them. Cole drove the supply wagon, and she sat on the bench beside him with Noah in her lap, and for the first 3 miles neither of them said much. Noah slept, which helped. She didn't have to manage him and manage the silence at the same time. The silence itself was not hostile. She'd been expecting hostility, or something pressing, some version of now that we're alone. But Cole Maddox drove the wagon like a man who had driven wagons alone for years and had simply added passengers without adjusting his internal state at all. He watched the road. He watched the tree line. Occasionally he said something brief and practical. Road gets rough here, hold on, or there's a drop on the right side, I'll go slow. After the 4th mile, she said, Why did you do it? He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I was in town for supplies. I saw what was happening. Plenty of people were in town. None of them did anything. Plenty of people, he said, weren't me. It wasn't an answer, really, but she let it go for the moment. The road climbed steadily as the afternoon wore on, the pine trees thickening on either side, the air dropping in temperature in a way she could feel in her face and her hands. Noah woke up around the 5th mile and was unhappy about it, and she was trying to manage him on her lap while the wagon tilted and rolled over increasingly rough ground, and Cole pulled the wagon to a stop without her asking and waited, eyes forward, while she sorted Noah out. She appreciated that. It was a small thing, but she was at the point where small things registered as significant. How long has the ranch been there? She asked, when Noah was settled and they were moving again. 12 years, built it myself. First 2 years were rough. What made it better? He thought about this for a moment. Time, he said, and getting better at the work. Are you from here originally, Montana? No. He didn't offer more, so she didn't push. The ranch appeared suddenly as they came around a long bend in the road, the trees giving way on one side to reveal a valley tucked into the mountain slope. Not big, but sheltered, with a creek running along the lower edge and a stand of pines to the northwest that would break the worst of the wind. The house was log, solid and low, with a covered porch running the length of the front. There was a barn, a smaller outbuilding, a chicken coop that had seen better days. A split-rail fence enclosed a pasture where 2 horses and a handful of cattle stood in the fading afternoon light, their breath visible in the cold. It was not beautiful exactly. It was stark and functional, and it looked like exactly what it was. A thing built by a person working alone, piece by piece, over a long time. It's not much, Cole said, and she realized that was the closest he'd come to an apology. It's solid, she said, which was more than she could say for the last 3 places she'd lived. He glanced at her briefly, and she thought she saw something shift in his expression, some small recalibration, and then he was looking at the road again. The house was cold inside. He'd been away for 2 days getting supplies, and the fire had been out since he left. He started it while she stood in the main room and took inventory. A kitchen along the back wall, a table, 4 chairs, a sitting area with 2 worn chairs by the fireplace, a bedroom door that stood open showing a made bed and a chest. Clean, at least. Not the domestic chaos of a man who'd stopped caring. Just spare. Like the inside of someone's head, when they'd decided comfort was a thing they didn't particularly need. There's another room, he said, coming in from the fireplace with his coat off. Off the back. I use it for storage mostly, but there's a bed frame in there. I'll get a mattress from the barn. There's a spare one, been dry. He paused. It'll be warmer than I can make it tonight, after the fire gets going. We'll be fine, she said. He looked at Noah again, that same brief, unreadable look. There's a cradle in the storage room too, belonged to... He stopped, started again. It's just sitting there. Thank you, she said. She didn't ask who it had belonged to. He hadn't offered it, and she was learning already that Cole Maddox said the things he intended to say and left the rest in silence, and that pushing into that silence without an invitation was probably not wise. She made supper from what he'd bought in town, salt pork and dried beans and the end of a loaf of bread she found wrapped on the kitchen shelf. Simple food, and she made it simple, not trying to dress it up, because dressing up bad ingredients just made a mess. Cole came in from the barn when she called and sat at the table and ate without ceremony, and when he was done, he said, "Good," in the same voice he might have said the fence is fixed, plainly, without performance, and she took it as the compliment she thought it was. After supper, while she was washing up, he sat in one of the chairs by the fire and read. Not a Bible, she'd half expected that out of habit, but what looked like a surveying manual, something with diagrams and numbers. He held it close to the lamp, and she could see that reading was slightly effortful for him, that he squinted and occasionally moved his lips over numbers. He'd probably taught himself, she thought. A lot of men out here had taught themselves whatever they knew, years past the age when it came easily. Noah fell asleep on the floor in front of the fire, where she'd laid him on a folded blanket, and she sat in the other chair and looked at the flames and tried to take stock of what her life actually was now. Thomas 3 weeks dead, the house sold, the furniture gone, 40 cents to her name, and a baby who needed her to be functional and clear-headed regardless of what she felt about any of it. And now this, a log house on a mountain with a man who'd paid $114 for the right to have someone cook his meals, and who had not, yet, given her any reason to think he wanted more than that, and who had put a cradle in her room for Noah without being asked. It didn't mean anything, necessarily. It was just a cradle. But it meant something that he'd thought of it. She became aware that Cole was no longer reading. She looked up and found him watching her, not with any particular urgency, but with the focused attention of a man who was genuinely trying to figure something out. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. He looked back at his book. A minute passed. "The cooperative," he said without looking up. "They do this a lot?" "More than they should," she said. "There are territorial laws supposed to prevent it. The way Pruitt reads them, debt satisfaction through indenture is technically still legal. No one's challenged it so far." "Someone should?" "Yes," she said. "Someone should." He looked up at her then. She held his gaze. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He took a moment. "Someone more beaten down." "The day's not over," she said, and she hadn't meant it to be funny exactly, but he made a sound that might have been a laugh, short, like he was surprised by it. And she found herself, against every reasonable expectation, almost smiling. Almost. She was not going to smile on the day she'd been auctioned off in the street. She had some standards left. But almost. The first week was an education. She had done domestic work before. She had kept house for Thomas for 2 years. And before Thomas, there had been her mother's house. And before that, the years she'd spent helping in the Cooley household back in Nebraska when her family needed the income. She was not unfamiliar with hard work. The ranch was a different category of hard work. The water came from a creek that was a quarter-mile from the house. In November, that meant breaking ice first thing in the morning before you could pull a bucket, and then carrying the bucket back on ground that was either frozen solid or frozen and then thawed and then frozen again, which made it worse. The wood supply was good. Cole had cut and stacked through the fall, obsessively, it seemed, the pile running half the length of the barn. But keeping fires going in 2 stoves simultaneously while also managing Noah was a constant juggling exercise that she failed at approximately once a day. The chickens were a disaster waiting to happen. The coop had a gap in the north wall that something had been getting in through, and she found that out on the 3rd morning when she went to collect eggs, and found evidence of something that was not a chicken having been in the coop recently. She fixed the gap herself with boards from the woodpile and a hammer she found in the barn, and she told Cole about it that evening. He looked at her. "You fixed it." "I fixed it." "With what?" "Boards and nails. I used the claw hammer from the shelf in the barn." He was quiet for a moment, apparently processing this. "Thank you," he said. I noticed there's also a gap along the bottom of the east wall that's going to be a problem. I can see daylight through it. I'll look at it tomorrow. I can do it myself if you tell me where you keep the spare boards." He looked at her again with that unreadable expression. "Second stack, back of the barn, right side." "Good," she said, and went back to the stove. She was aware that she was not behaving the way he had probably expected his household help to behave. She didn't know exactly what he had expected. Someone quieter, maybe. More deferential. She was not by nature deferential, and the situation she was in did not seem to call for it. He had bought her debt. He had not bought her. She thought there was a distinction there that mattered. He had not so far pushed against that distinction. She wasn't sure yet whether that was his actual understanding of the arrangement or just patience. Time would tell. Noah, for his part, seemed to have no reservations about Cole Maddox at all. 11 months old and already a confident assessor of character, he had apparently decided on day one that the quiet man with the dark coat was interesting and worth investigating, and he pursued this investigation with the determination of a small naturalist who had found a new species. He crawled after Cole when Cole was in the house. He pulled himself up on Cole's boot and stood there, looking very pleased with himself. He handed Cole things, a wooden spoon, a piece of bark, one of his own socks, with the solemn urgency of someone delivering important correspondence. Cole accepted these offerings with the careful solemnity they seemed to require. He never encouraged it, exactly, but he never stepped away from it either. Once, on the fourth day, she came in from the woodpile to find Cole sitting on the floor with his back against the chair and Noah in his lap, both of them looking at something. A piece of rope that Cole had twisted into a shape, a rough loop that he was moving slowly in front of the baby. Noah was watching it with complete concentration. Cole looked up when she came in. She didn't say anything, neither did he. She went back to what she was doing, but she thought about it that evening, after Noah was asleep, while she sat by the fire and Cole sat across from her with his book. She thought about what kind of man spent years alone in the mountains and bought a stranger's debt on a cold November morning. She thought about the cradle he'd mentioned without explaining. She thought about the rope twisted into shapes for a baby. There was a person inside the silence he kept around himself, she thought. She just didn't know yet what kind of person it was. On the 8th day, the temperature dropped 30 degrees in 6 hours. She'd been watching the sky all afternoon, the way the clouds were building to the northwest, a particular gray-green color that she'd learned to pay attention to back in Nebraska. She mentioned it to Cole at midday, and he looked north, and his expression shifted into something tighter and more focused. "Storm," he said. "A bad one. I need to get the cattle in." He was already moving, pulling on his coat. "Can you get wood in? As much as we can stack in the house?" "Yes. How much?" "Stack it to the roof if you can." He was at the door. "If this is what I think it is, we'll be inside for 2 days, maybe 3. He was gone before she could ask anything else. She got wood in. Noah was awake and mobile, which complicated things, so she put him in the laundry basket with 2 wooden spoons to keep him occupied and moved wood until her arms ached and her shoulders were burning, until there was a stack along the interior wall of the main room that reached her shoulder. She brought in extra water. She checked that the stove dampers were working. She found the lamp oil and confirmed there was enough. Cole came in with the dark snow already beginning, not a gentle beginning, but the aggressive slant of a storm that was serious about itself. He was covered in it, stamping his boots on the porch. "Cattle are in," he said, coming through the door. "Horses, too." He looked at the wood stack. He looked at her. "I also brought in extra water and checked the lamp oil," she said. "I wasn't sure what else you'd need." He stood there for a moment, snow melting off his hat brim. That's everything, yeah." He pulled off his coat. His hands were red from the cold. "You've done this before. Prepped for a storm." "Plenty of times." He nodded slowly. "Good," he said, for the second time in 8 days, in the same plain voice, and she thought again that it might be all the praise she was going to get from him, and thought also that she was starting to find it more satisfying than she expected. They ate supper while the storm built outside, the wind coming in hard against the north wall, rattling the shutters she'd latched. Noah was fascinated by the noise. Cole was quiet through most of the meal, but it wasn't the silence of indifference. It was the silence of a man listening to the weather, tracking it, calculating. "Will the barn hold?" she asked. "It's held worse." You sound like you're not entirely sure. He glanced at her. I'm never entirely sure about anything, but it's a good barn. When did you build it? Third year. I had help that year. He looked at his plate. A neighbor from down the valley. He's gone now. She didn't ask what gone meant. There were too many ways to go in country like this, and none of them were worth pressing on. After supper, after she'd put Noah down in the back room, she came back to the fire and found Cole standing at the window, watching the dark and the blowing snow. He had his arms crossed, not tense exactly, but contained. The way people stood when they were thinking something they hadn't decided yet whether to say. She sat down. She picked up the mending she'd started on his wool shirt earlier in the day. The elbow had been worn through and she had found thread in the sewing kit in the kitchen drawer. He turned from the window. He looked at the shirt in her hands. You don't have to do that, he said. I know. She threaded the needle. But it's a good shirt and the hole was getting bigger. He sat down across from her. He picked up his book but didn't open it. After a moment, he said, How did you end up with Thomas Harper? She looked up at him. It was the most personal thing he had asked her in 8 days. I was 19, she said. He came through Nebraska on his way west and he had plans. He was good at talking about plans. She looked back at the shirt. He was not good at carrying them out, but I didn't know that yet. Did you love him? She considered the question honestly. I thought I did. Later, I thought I'd loved the plans. She pushed the needle through. That probably sounds cold. It sounds true, he said. She looked up at him again. He was watching her steadily with that same focused attention from before. What about you, she said. The cradle in the back room. Was it yours or? She saw it land. Just a fraction of a second. The slightest flinch, quickly controlled. My wife, he said. She died 6 years ago. The baby too. The wind hit the north wall hard enough to shake the shutter latch. I'm sorry, Evelyn said. And then, because she thought he would probably prefer this to anything more elaborate, she looked back at the shirt and she sewed, and she let him have the silence. After a while, he opened his book. The storm went on outside, and the fire went on inside, and Noah slept in the back room in the cradle that had been waiting 6 years for someone to need it. And Evelyn Harper sat in a chair she hadn't owned a week ago and began, very cautiously, to feel like she might be somewhere she could exist without counting the days until she could leave. She wasn't sure what to do with that feeling yet, but she kept it. The storm lasted 3 days. Not 3 days of the same intensity. It had peaks and valleys, hours when the wind dropped enough that you could hear individual snowflakes landing, and then hours when it came back with a kind of personal fury, as if it had remembered something it meant to finish. Cole had been right about the barn. It held. He checked it twice a day, going out in the gray half-light with a rope tied to the porch post and the other end around his waist, because the visibility was bad enough that 11 yards from the house, you could lose the house. Evelyn watched him do this from the window the first time, and then stopped watching because it made her feel something she wasn't ready to categorize. Inside, the three of them existed in a proximity that the house was not designed for and that none of them had exactly prepared for. Noah adapted fastest, because Noah always adapted fastest. He was at the age where his entire world was whatever was within arm's reach, and within arm's reach was warm and fed and contained enough toys, a wooden spoon, a tin cup, the length of rope Cole had twisted into shapes that first time. So he found the situation satisfactory. He crawled the perimeter of the main room with the systematic dedication of a surveyor, investigated the legs of every piece of furniture, and had decided by the end of the first day that Cole's boots, specifically, were the most interesting objects in the house. Cole bore this with a patience she hadn't expected from him. On the second day, when Noah pulled himself upright on Cole's knee and stood there gripping the wool of his trousers with both fists and shouting, not upset, just shouting, the way babies sometimes shouted to confirm that shouting worked, Cole looked down at him for a long moment and then said quietly, like he was saying it mostly to himself, "He's loud." "He is," Evelyn said. She was at the stove. "He's been loud since he was born." The midwife said she'd never heard a baby shout like that at the moment of arrival. "What did she do about it?" "She laughed." Evelyn stirred the pot. She said it meant he knew what he wanted. Cole looked at Noah. Noah shouted again, apparently in agreement. "Does he walk yet?" Cole asked. "He's trying. He lets go sometimes and then looks very surprised when he falls." As if on cue, Noah let go of Cole's trousers, took one tilting, optimistic step forward, and sat down hard on the floorboards. He looked at the floor. He looked at Cole. He grabbed Cole's trouser leg again and hauled himself back up. "Huh," Cole said. She kept her eyes on the pot. The conversations they had those 3 days were mostly practical. Storm logistics, supply inventory, what needed to be done when the weather broke. But in the spaces around the practical conversations, other things came out. Not confessions, nothing dramatic, just the ordinary accumulation of detail that happened when two people were stuck in a small house with nowhere else to be. She learned that he'd come to Montana from Tennessee originally when he was 21, with a cousin who had died of fever the second winter. She learned that the limp in his right leg was from a horse falling on him 6 years ago, the same year his wife died, and that the two events were 3 months apart, and that he said this without self-pity, just as a sequence of facts. She learned that he could not cook anything except salt pork and eggs without producing something inedible, and that he knew this about himself, and that finding this out had been expensive in ruined food. He learned, she could see him learning it, watching her from across the room, that she was not frightened easily, that she was competent with tools and practical problems, that she read when she could, which was not often, that she had a habit of going very quiet when she was actually thinking hard about something, which was different from her ordinary quiet, and that the difference was visible if you were paying attention. She wasn't sure yet whether she wanted him paying attention, but he was careful about it, and that counted for something. The storm broke on the morning of the 4th day. She woke to the absence of wind, which was a sound in itself after 3 days of it, and lay still for a moment listening to the silence before she heard Noah stirring in the cradle. By the time she'd fed him and started the morning fire, Cole was already out checking the barn and the cattle, and when he came back in, his report was delivered in the same clipped, factual register he used for everything. 2 fence posts down on the north side of the pasture. No cattle lost. No structural damage worth worrying about. Road would be impassable for another day at least, but would start to clear after that. "I'll fix the fence post today," he said, stamping snow off his boots. "I'll come help." He stopped. "You don't need to. 2 people will do it faster than 1. He looked at her. She looked at him. He appeared to accept this as logical. "Noah, I'll strap him on." She'd done it before and would do it again. Noah seemed to enjoy being carried that way, had spent half the walk up the mountain road asleep against her chest. Cole nodded and went to get the post driver. The work was hard and cold and took most of the morning, and she was not able to help with the actual driving of posts. It required a strength she didn't have. But she dug out the base of the holes where the snow had packed in, and she held the posts steady while he set them, and she ran the fence wire when that was what was needed. Cole worked without wasted motion. The way someone worked when they'd done a task alone so many times that efficiency had stopped being a goal and become just the shape of the work. He didn't explain what he was doing or ask if she was following. He just worked, and she worked alongside him, and Noah slept against her chest for most of it, and woke up near the end and watched the whole operation with his usual scientific interest. When they were done, Cole looked at the fence line and then at her and said, "Good." She was getting used to that word from him. It was starting to mean more than the word itself. They walked back to the house in the thin winter sunlight, the snow blinding white on every surface, and she was tired in the clean, straightforward way that came from physical work rather than the grinding tired she'd been carrying since before Thomas died. Noah was heavy on her chest, and her shoulders ached, and she realized, something close to all right. Not happy. That was too large a word for what she'd earned the right to feel, but functional, present, like a person who existed somewhere instead of someone just trying to make it to the next hour. She held on to that feeling carefully, the way you held on to something fragile you'd found unexpectedly. December came in cold and clear, days of hard sunlight on snow so bright it was painful to look at directly. The road down the mountain was passable again, but barely, and Cole made one supply run in the first week and came back with flour and dried fruit and a length of wool cloth she hadn't asked for. "For the boy," he said, putting it on the table. His blanket's wearing thin. She looked at the cloth. She looked at him. "Thank you." He went back out to the barn. She cut the cloth that evening and started stitching a new blanket for Noah, and she thought about a man who had noticed a baby's blanket wearing thin and bought wool without being asked. And she thought about what that said about him, and she wasn't sure yet what it said, but it was not nothing. The rhythm of the ranch was becoming her rhythm. Not because it had remade her into something different, but because it fit the way she was already shaped. Early mornings, steady work, the particular satisfaction of a task that stayed done. She fixed the gap in the east wall of the chicken coop. She reorganized the kitchen shelves so the things she used daily were at hand. She started a kitchen garden plan on paper. Not a real garden yet, obviously. Not in December, but a layout of what she wanted to try in spring, where the light would be right, what would likely grow at this elevation. Cole found the paper one morning when he came in for midday meal, and he stood looking at it for a long moment. "Is this the south side of the house?" he said. "Yes, the snow will melt there earliest, and the soil. I tried a garden the second year. Nothing grew." "What did you plant?" He thought about it. "I'm not sure." That might have been the problem. He set the paper down. He almost smiled. "Might have been." He sat down. "You know gardening? My mother kept a garden in Nebraska. I helped from when I was about 5. Beans mostly, but she tried other things, though." She put a plate in front of him. "At this elevation, the season's short, but there are things that will work. Turnips, kale, some varieties of potato. The beans might work if you start them inside early enough." He ate for a moment. "If you're here in spring," he said carefully. She sat down across from him. "If I'm here in spring," she agreed. They looked at each other across the table, and neither of them looked away. And it was not a comfortable look exactly, but it was honest, and she thought that honest was worth more than comfortable most of the time. "Do you want to be?" he said. "That depends," she said, "on how December goes." He considered this. He ate. "Fair," he said. She ate too. Outside, the wind had picked up slightly, moving through the pine trees to the northwest, a sound she was learning to read. This was not storm wind, just cold weather moving through. The stove was going well. Noah was asleep in the back room. "My wife's name was Clara," Cole said. She looked up. He was looking at his plate. I don't say her name much," he said. "I thought I should say it at least once, given that you're sleeping in the room where her cradle is." "Clara," Evelyn said. He nodded. "Did she like it here? On the ranch?" He was quiet for a moment. "She did. More than I expected her to. She was from Virginia originally, and I thought the winters would break her." He paused. "They didn't. She was—" He stopped, started differently. "She was tougher than she looked." "Most women are," Evelyn said. He glanced at her. "Yeah," he said. "I'm learning that." The incident with the horse happened the second week of December, and it was her fault, partly, which she acknowledged later without excusing herself about it. She had gone to the barn in the afternoon to check on the chickens, taking a route past the paddock where Cole kept his 2 working horses, the bay mare he rode, and a gray gelding he used for heavy hauling. She'd been past the paddock a dozen times, and the horses had been indifferent to her, the way horses were indifferent to things that weren't interesting. But she had Noah on her hip that day, and Noah chose that moment to let out one of his periodic shouts, the loud confirmatory kind, the kind that said, "I exist and it is working," directly into the gray gelding's ear, because they had gotten close to the fence without her calculating that. The gelding spooked. It was a genuine spook, not the theatrical kind. The horse went sideways and then straight back, and in doing so it caught the fence post with its hindquarters and the latch on the paddock gate, which apparently had not been as securely fastened as Cole had thought. And suddenly the gate was open, and the gray gelding was moving out of it with the purposeful anxiety of a horse that had decided it needed to be somewhere else immediately. Evelyn grabbed the gate with her free hand. The horse was already past her. Noah was on her hip, still shouting, now apparently because the large moving thing was exciting. "Stop," she said to Noah, which had never worked and didn't work now. She secured the gate. That left the bay mare still inside, which was good. The gray gelding was at the far end of the paddock area, not running, just moving quickly in circles, blowing hard, being dramatic about the whole thing. She did not have a free hand. She had Noah. She could set Noah down in the snow. No, she couldn't. It was too cold. She could take him back to the house and come back, but by then the gelding could be anywhere. "Hold still," said Cole, from directly behind her. She hadn't heard him come out of the barn. He moved past her without touching her, talking to the horse in the low, steady voice people used when they were trying to convince an animal that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. It took him about 10 minutes to get the gelding calmed and back through the gate, and it wasn't a smooth 10 minutes. The horse balked twice and once wheeled away entirely, and Cole followed it with the same patient persistence that characterized everything he did, patient and not particularly happy about it. When the gate was latched and the horse was inside, he turned around. She said before he could say anything, "That was my fault. I got too close to the fence with Noah and he startled him. I'm sorry." Cole looked at her. He looked at Noah, who was watching the horses with sparkling interest. "The latch is worn," Cole said. "I should have replaced it in October. That's on me. I still should have been more careful. You didn't know the latch was bad. I should have checked it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You check the latch on the paddock gate when you go past it?" "I check everything when I go past it. It's a habit." He looked at her with the expression she was starting to recognize, the one that meant she had done or said something that rearranged some assumption he'd been carrying around. "All right," he said. "We both get part of it." He looked at the gate. "I'll fix the latch this afternoon." She nodded. She looked at Noah, who had stopped watching the horses and gone back to just existing contentedly on her hip. "He doesn't understand that he caused a problem," she said. "No," Cole agreed. "He's going to cause more of them." "Probably." He reached out, then, she hadn't expected it, and with one rough finger briefly touched the side of Noah's face, just the cheek, just for a second. Noah turned to look at him immediately, with the absolute focus of a baby who has received attention. Cole pulled his hand back. "I don't know anything about babies," he said. His voice was slightly different, not softer exactly, but less contained. "I didn't either," Evelyn said, "before I had him." Cole looked at her. "And now?" "And now I know enough," she said. "Most of it you learn as you go." He was close to her. They were standing near the gate, and the afternoon was growing dim, and she became aware suddenly of the proximity, the warmth of another person in the cold, the fact that this was the closest they'd stood to each other since the day in town. She could see the lines of his face clearly, the way the years and the weather had worked on him, the scar along his jaw that she'd noticed before and never asked about. He didn't move away. She didn't move away. Noah reached out and grabbed Cole's coat lapel again, with both hands this time, and pulled. Cole looked down at him. He looked back up at her. "He does that," he said, repeating her own words from the first day back to her. "He does," she said. Something passed between them. She wasn't entirely sure what, only that it had passed, that they had both felt it, and that neither of them was going to name it yet. He stepped back. She stepped back. He said something about the latch, and she said something about starting supper, and they went their separate directions, and she did not look back to see if he watched her go. She thought he might have. The middle weeks of December established a routine that was less a routine than a daily negotiation between what the ranch needed and what the weather permitted, but it held. She managed the house, the chickens, and Noah. Cole managed the cattle, the horses, and the maintenance work that cold weather created an endless supply. They ate together in the mornings and evenings. They talked about practical things, and occasionally about things that were not practical, and the ratio was slowly shifting. She asked him one evening why he had never gone back to Tennessee. "Nothing to go back for," he said. He was at the table cleaning a length of harness leather. "My people were mostly gone by the time I left. I was young enough that West seemed better than staying put. Do you ever regret it?" He thought about this more than he usually thought about things. "No," he said finally. "This is mine. What I have here, I built. I know every board and every fence post." He paused. "That means something to me." "Yes," she said. "I understand that." He looked at her. "The house where I grew up," she said. "My father built it himself, before he got sick. After he died, it was sold for back taxes, and we left Nebraska." She smoothed the piece of cloth she was mending. "I've been in other people's spaces ever since. Thomas's house was rented. Every house we lived in was rented." She paused. "There's something about a place you built, or a place you've earned. It sits differently." Cole was watching her. "You've never had that." "Not yet." "Evelyn," he stopped. "Don't," she said gently but clearly. "Not yet. We're not there yet." She wasn't sure what she was stopping him from saying. Maybe he wasn't sure either, but he nodded and he went back to the harness, and she went back to her mending, and the fire went on, and the pine trees moved in the wind outside, and something between them sat in the room with them, unnamed, patient, taking up space. Christmas was 3 days away when Cole came in one afternoon with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not troubled exactly, but carrying something. She was at the stove. Noah was on the floor. She looked at Cole and waited. "I need to go up to the north pasture tomorrow," he said. "There are 3 head of cattle that haven't come in with the others the last 2 days. I need to find out if they're just ranging or if there's a problem." "How long will you be gone?" "Should be back before dark." "The north pasture is 3 miles up the ridge." She looked at him. "Should be?" "It depends on what I find." He set his hat on the hook. "If a fence is down up there, it could take longer." "And if you're not back by dark?" He met her eyes. "I'll be back by dark." "Cole?" He was quiet. "What do I do?" she said. "If you're not back by dark?" He looked at the floor. He looked at Noah. He looked at her. "There's a lantern on the porch," he said. "Light it when the sun goes down. I'll be able to see it from the ridge road." She understood then that they had just made a plan for him not being back by dark, which meant it was a possibility he was taking seriously, which meant she needed to take it seriously too. "Be careful," she said. He took his hat back off the hook and turned it in his hands, and he said, "I'm always careful." And it was true, and also not entirely reassuring, and he put the hat back on the hook, and that was the end of the conversation. She lay awake that night longer than usual, listening to the wind, thinking about 3 miles of ridge road in December. She thought about what she would do if he wasn't back by dark. She did not think about why the thought of him not coming back did something to her chest that she hadn't expected. She wasn't ready for that part yet, but she felt it there, in the dark, solid, and inconvenient, the beginning of something she was not going to be able to prevent. By the time Noah woke at dawn, she had decided 2 things. She was going to learn the ridge road before she needed to ride it, and she was done pretending she wasn't afraid of losing a man she had known for less than a month, and had not, strictly speaking, been given the right to fear losing. She wasn't sure what she was going to do about either of those things. But she got up, she started the fire, she fed her son, and she began the day the way she had begun every day since the auction block, by moving forward, because stopping was not something she knew how to do anymore. He left at first light. She watched him go from the porch, her arms crossed against the cold, and she watched until the dark shape of him on the bay mare disappeared around the first bend in the ridge road where the pines closed in and took him. Noah was still asleep. The ranch was very quiet in the way mountain mornings were quiet. Not empty, but held, like the land was conserving something before the day started spending it. She went inside and started the fire and told herself he'd said he'd be back before dark. And he was a man who meant what he said, and she believed both of those things. And she was still uneasy in a way she couldn't argue herself out of. The day passed. The way days passed when you were waiting on something. The work was the same work: fire, water, feed the chickens, manage Noah, start the bread, bring in wood. But there was a quality to it, a background frequency, like a note held just below what you could consciously hear. She kept finding herself at the window, looking north toward the ridge road, seeing nothing except trees and snow and the pale gray December sky. Noah was in a restless mood, which didn't help. He was cutting a tooth. She could feel the hard ridge just under the gum when she let him gnaw on her knuckle, which he preferred to all the wooden and cloth things she offered him. He was not in pain exactly, but he was irritable in the specific way of teething babies. Nothing satisfied him for more than a few minutes, and he wanted to be held and then wanted to be put down and then wanted to be held again. And she moved through the day with him on her hip or over her shoulder or on the floor beside her feet, talking to him in the low continuous murmur she'd developed over 11 months of sole parenthood, an ongoing narration of whatever she was doing. "Now, we're checking the bread. It needs another half hour. See how it's rising? That's good. That means the yeast is working. When you're old enough to bake bread, I'll teach you how to tell when it's ready." Noah regarded the bread with the focused skepticism of someone who had not yet decided whether bread was interesting. "You'll like bread," she told him. "Everyone likes bread." By midday, she had done everything on the morning's list and most of what she'd planned for the afternoon. The restless efficiency of someone who could not make themselves sit still. She ate lunch standing at the kitchen shelf, watching the north through the window. The sky had shifted during the morning, she noticed. The clean pale blue of early morning had gone to something thicker, a white gray that sat lower on the mountains and made the light flat and directionless. Weather coming. She didn't like that. She didn't like it specifically because Cole had said he'd be back before dark, and the clouds would take the light early and make before dark a shorter window than he'd probably calculated when he'd said it. She went to the barn in the afternoon to check the horses. The gray gelding and 3 other ranch horses Cole kept for backup were in their stalls, eating hay steadily with the unconcerned patience of animals who had been through enough Montana winters to understand that the best response to a storm coming was to eat and wait. She stood in the barn for a while, smelling the familiar smell of horses and hay and old wood, and she looked at the gray gelding and thought about what she knew of the Ridge Road, 3 miles north. She'd asked Cole about it 2 days ago, in the way she'd been asking about the ranch generally, not interrogating, just building a map in her mind, understanding the land she was living on. He'd described it in his characteristic plain way. Ridge Road went north from the upper gate, followed the slope line for about a mile, then climbed steeper for another 1.5 miles before opening onto the north pasture. One exposed section near the top where the trees thinned out. One creek crossing, usually shallow but icy this time of year. She had listened carefully. She had not told him she was listening carefully. She went back inside when the cold worked through her coat. Noah had fallen asleep on the floor, which occasionally happened with teething babies. They wore themselves out being miserable, and then simply crashed wherever they were. She put him in his cradle and stood in the kitchen and looked at the sky through the window. The clouds were lower now, definitely lower. She let the afternoon go as long as she could. She was not a person given to panic, and she was not panicking. She was doing what she'd done since November, assessing the situation accurately and deciding what the situation required. What the situation appeared to require, by 4 o'clock, with the light already dying at the edges and Cole not back and the clouds sitting on the mountaintops, was that she stop waiting. She had thought about this. She had been thinking about it all day, underneath everything else. She knew the road. She had the gray gelding and the other horses. She could ride, had ridden since childhood, was not exceptional at it, but was competent. She had the supplies. And she had Noah. That was the part that complicated things. She could not leave Noah in the house alone, and she could not take him on a cold, dark mountain ride without accepting a level of risk that sat heavily on her. She turned it over and she turned it over, and in the end it came down to this. The risk of Cole being hurt somewhere on that ridge in deteriorating weather was real, and the risk of a well-wrapped baby strapped against her chest on a slow, careful ride was different in kind, and she was Noah's mother and she made the call. She dressed Noah in everything she could layer on him. His wool blanket, the new one, the one made from the cloth Cole had bought without being asked, went around him in 2 passes, and then she strapped him to her chest with the canvas harness, and then her coat went over both of them, buttoned as far as it would button, leaving Noah's face clear. She could feel his warmth against her sternum. "I need you to cooperate," she told him. He was awake now, alert with the particular alertness that came after a nap, looking up at her from inside the bundle of wool with the wide-eyed calm of a baby who had not yet learned to be afraid of dark mountain roads. "I mean it," she said. He grabbed the front of her coat. "Close enough," she said. She left the lantern burning on the porch. She had promised she would, and she kept her promises. She brought a second lantern for the road. She went to the barn and she tacked up the gray gelding because she thought his steadiness was worth more in bad conditions than the mare's speed, and she was not certain about her reasoning, but she committed to it. Getting onto a horse with a baby strapped to your chest was not elegant. She managed it from the mounting block Cole had built along the barn wall, and she sat for a moment once she was up, making sure she was balanced, making sure the gelding was calm, making sure Noah was secure. The horse shifted under her but didn't spook. She adjusted her grip on the lantern. Then she pointed him north, and they went. What? The ride up the Ridge Road was the longest ride of her life, and it was not actually that long. The light was gone by the time she cleared the upper gate. Not fully dark, but the dark of heavy cloud cover and early winter evening, a charcoal dark that the lantern pushed back about 20 feet in every direction and no further. The trees on either side of the road were black shapes, close enough that she could see their outlines. Snow was beginning to come down. Not hard, not a storm yet, but the preliminary small flakes that were the announcement of something more serious. The gelding was picking his footing carefully on the frozen road. She let him set the pace, which was slow, which was right. She kept the lantern out to the side so it lit the road rather than her own face. She could hear her own breathing and the horses and the sound of hooves on packed snow and nothing else. Noah was quiet. He'd made a small sound when they first moved out of the barn into the cold, but since then he'd been still against her chest, and she chose to believe he'd fallen back asleep rather than think too hard about the alternatives. She talked to herself. Not loudly, just enough to hear her own voice, because the silence was the kind of silence that got inside your head if you let it. Road stays flat for about another half-mile, she said. Then it climbs. There's a creek crossing before the top. I'll go slow at the creek. The gelding flicked an ear back at the sound of her voice, which she took as acknowledgement. The first mile was manageable. Hard, cold, dark, but manageable. The snow picked up slightly around what she estimated was the midpoint, and she tucked her chin against the top of Noah's head and kept going. Her hands were cold through her gloves. She could feel the lantern handle as a weight more than as something her fingers were gripping. She changed hands twice to flex the warmth back in. The road climbed steeper. She felt the gelding's gait change, feel his hindquarters lower slightly as he worked up the slope, and she shifted her weight forward to help him. The trees thinned on her left and the drop appeared. She couldn't see it in the dark, but she could feel it in the wind, the sudden exposure that told her she was on the edge of something. She moved the gelding to the right side of the road without thinking about it too hard. The creek crossing was icy. She heard it before she saw it, the particular sound of water trying to move under ice, and she pulled the gelding back to a walk that was barely a walk, slower than she thought possible to still be forward motion, and she let him find his own footing over the ice because he had 4 legs, and she had 2 concerns, and she was going to trust him with the ground. They got across. She let out the breath she'd been holding. The exposed section was next, the place Cole had mentioned where the trees gave out for about 200 yards and the road ran across open slope. The wind came in full there, cold and hard, and with the particular purpose of wind that has had a long, unobstructed run at you. The snow was horizontal. She turned her face away from it and kept her body between the wind and Noah, and she and the gelding went through that 200 yards in what felt like the better part of an hour, and was probably 4 minutes. Then the trees again, and the wind cut, and she could breathe. And that was when she saw the light. Not the warm yellow of a lantern, more like the glow of something. A fire, maybe. The reflection of a small fire against the tree trunks ahead and to the right. And then she heard the horse. She pulled the gelding up. The sound was a horse moving through trees, off the road, the sound of hooves on snow, and the occasional creak of a branch. And then Cole's voice, talking to the bay mare the way he talked to horses, low and steady, and not particularly addressing the horse so much as just maintaining contact. "Cole," she called. The sound stopped. "Cole," louder. "Evelyn," his voice from the trees to the right, not far. 30 yards, maybe less. She let out the breath she'd been holding since 4 o'clock. He came out of the trees on foot, leading the bay mare. The mare was limping. Left foreleg, she could see it in the way the horse was favoring her weight. Cole was leading her with one hand and carrying his own lantern with the other, and he was covered in snow and his hat was pulled low, and he looked at her on the gray gelding with an expression she couldn't fully read in the lantern light. He stopped. He looked at her. He looked at the bundle that was Noah strapped to her chest. "You came up here," he said. "You didn't come back." The mare threw a shoe on the ice crossing and then went lame when I tried to push through. He looked at the horse. "I was going slow. I was going to make it before full dark." "It's past full dark." "I know." He looked back at her. "You came up the ridge road in the dark with Noah." "Yes." "That was—" He stopped. He started differently. "You shouldn't have done that." She looked at him steadily from the back of the gray gelding. "Are you going to stand there and tell me it was a bad idea, or are you going to take your horse and let's get back down before the snow gets worse?" He stood there for another moment. The snow came down between them, small and indifferent. "Move up," he said, and she moved back on the gelding's back, and he tied the mare's lead to the saddle ring, and then he got up in front of her, and the gelding objected briefly and then accepted the additional weight, and she settled behind Cole with Noah between them, and she could feel the cold coming off Cole's coat, and underneath it, the warmth of him, and she adjusted her grip on the lantern, and they started back down the ridge road. He didn't speak for the first half-mile. She didn't push it. The descent was easier than the climb had been. The gelding knew the road, and having Cole's weight ahead of her was actually a help, his body blocking some of the wind and his knowledge of the road giving the horse confidence. She watched his back in front of her, and she felt Noah breathing steadily against her chest, and the snow continued to fall, not storm-hard yet, but building. At the exposed section, Cole said, without turning his head, "Stay close to the slope side." And she was already on the slope side because she'd learned that coming up, and she said, "I know." And he nodded. They went through the exposed section and back into the trees. At the creek crossing, he got down and walked the horses across by hand, each one separately, and she stayed mounted on the gelding with Noah and crossed last. And on the far side, Cole got back up without comment. It was the mile after the creek, in the relative shelter of the trees with the worst of the climb behind them, that he spoke. "How did you know the road?" he said. "You described it 2 days ago." Silence. "You asked me about the north pasture," he said. I thought you were just making conversation." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah. I wasn't just making conversation." He was quiet again, longer this time. She could feel the tension in his back, some held thing working itself out. "I've been up that road alone 100 times, he said. "I know every piece of it. I know. If something had happened to you on that road in the dark, with Noah—" "Something was happening to you on that road," she said. "I didn't know what it was or how bad. But you didn't come back, and the light was going, and the weather was turning, and I made a decision." She paused. "I'd make the same one again." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different, less contained, like something had come loose in it. "Nobody has—" He stopped. "I've been up here alone for 3 years, Evelyn. And before that, it was just Clara and me, and we kept to ourselves mostly. Nobody comes up this road to look for me." "I noticed that," she said. "So when I saw you coming through those trees with a lantern in the dark and Noah on your chest, I didn't—" He stopped again. She could feel the effort of it. A man who had spent years keeping things inside himself, trying to find language for something he hadn't needed language for before. "I didn't know what to do with that," he said finally. She didn't say anything. She let him have it, the way he'd let her have silence when she needed it. They were back on the flat section of the road now. The upper gate appeared ahead, the fence line emerging from the dark, and beyond it the pale glow of the lantern she'd left burning on the porch. "There's the light," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I saw it from the ridge," he said. "Before I heard you. I saw it from up there." "Good," she said. "That was the point." He turned his head slightly. Not quite enough to see her, but enough that she knew he was trying. "Evelyn." "What?" "Thank you," he said. And then, "I'm sorry I scared you." She had not said she was scared. She had been very careful not to say it, but she didn't deny it. "Don't do it again," she said. "I'll try," he said, which was honest in a way that wouldn't have been, and she appreciated the honesty more than she would have appreciated the easier answer. Tess. They came down to the ranch in the full dark, snow falling steadily, and the lantern on the porch was the most welcome thing she had seen in a long time. She slid down from the gelding in the barnyard and stood on uncertain legs. She'd been braced and tense for 2 hours, and her body had apparently not known what to do with that tension, except store it in her thighs and her lower back. And now it was informing her of this in clear terms. Cole got down and took the horses into the barn. She went inside with Noah. Noah, extraordinary child that he was, had slept through most of it. He woke up now in the warmth of the house and was cheerful about it, as if a nighttime mountain ride were an entirely normal feature of his existence. She unwrapped him carefully, checked him over, cold cheeks, warm everywhere else, irritable tooth still in progress, and set him on the floor near the stove with the rope toy and the tin cup. And then she sat down in the chair closest to the stove, and she shook for about 2 minutes. Not visible shaking. The internal kind. The kind that happened when you'd been holding yourself together by concentration, and the concentration was no longer required. She pressed her hands against her knees and breathed through it. By the time Cole came in from the barn, she was done with it. She was at the stove making something hot, because that was what the situation required. He came through the door still in his coat, stamping snow, and he pulled up short when he saw Noah on the floor with the tin cup and her at the stove, and the heat of the house around them, just stopped in the doorway for a moment like he was absorbing it. "The mare's leg?" she said. "Strained, I think. Not broken. She needs rest and warmth." He came in and took off his coat. His hands were worse than hers, red and stiff, the knuckles cracked from the cold. "I'll know more in the morning." "Sit down," she said. "I'll get you coffee." He sat. She poured and brought it to him, and then went back to the stove, and he wrapped both hands around the cup and said nothing for a while, which was usual. Noah crawled to Cole's boot. He grabbed the ankle with both hands and pulled himself up, stood there looking very pleased. Cole looked down at him. His face did something complicated. She caught it in her peripheral vision, didn't look directly, didn't want to make him self-conscious about it. Something moved in him, looking at the baby. Something that wasn't quite any single emotion she could name. "He's going to start walking soon," Cole said. "Properly." "Any day," she agreed. "He'll get into everything." "He already gets into everything." "More everything," Cole said. She turned from the stove and looked at him directly. He was watching Noah, not her. The lantern light was warm and the fire was going, and outside the snow was getting serious, and she thought that this exact thing, this small ordinary scene, was what she had not had in 2 years of marriage to a man with plans. Not warmth, exactly. Not safety, although it was those things. Something more specific. The feeling of being in a room where everyone in it was accounted for. She hadn't known how much she'd been wanting to feel that until she felt it. "Cole?" she said. He looked up. She wasn't sure, in the moment, what she had intended to say. Something was close to the surface. She could feel it, the shape of it, something that had been building since the auction block in the mud, and the long drive up the mountain and the storm, and the weeks of practical mornings, and the gray gelding spook, and the cloth bought without asking. It was all of those things together, pressing against the lid she'd kept on it. She didn't say it. She wasn't ready to say it. But something showed in her face. She felt it showing, felt herself not quite controlling it the way she normally could. And he saw it. He was looking at her, and she was looking at him. And he had been alone for 3 years, and before that, he had lost everything in 3 months. And she had been moving from rented room to rented room for years, counting the days until something changed. And neither of them had planned for any of this, and neither of them knew what to do with it. And for a moment, neither of them tried to figure it out. She looked away first, back to the stove. "Supper in 20 minutes, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Cole didn't answer right away. Then he said, "All right." His voice was different from usual, quieter, like something in him was being careful too. Noah let go of Cole's boot and sat down hard, and immediately grabbed it again and hauled himself back up. Cole put one hand down automatically just below the baby's arm, not grabbing, not holding, just there, in case. The way you put your hand near something you didn't want to fall. She saw that, and she turned back to the stove so he wouldn't see what it did to her face. Outside, the snow fell and the wind built in the pines, and the ranch settled into the particular silence of a winter night on a mountain. And inside there was warmth and light and the sound of a baby working on standing upright. And Evelyn Harper stood at the stove and understood, with the clarity that only comes after you've been truly frightened and then had the fear taken away, that she was not leaving this ranch in spring. She was not going to be able to leave this ranch in spring. She didn't know yet what that meant, or what Cole would say if she told him, or whether what she'd seen in his face tonight was what she thought she'd seen. There were 100 things she didn't know, but she knew that she had ridden up a mountain road in the dark and the snow with her son strapped to her chest to find a man who hadn't come home. And she had not hesitated, and she was not sorry, and those 3 things together told her everything she needed to know about where she was standing. She stirred the pot. She listened to Noah. She waited for supper to be ready. And Cole Maddox sat at the table in his own kitchen with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that was going cold, and he was looking at nothing visible. And there was an expression on his face that she hadn't seen before, and that she did not look at directly, but that she held in the edge of her vision the way you held a light you weren't sure was real, carefully, without pressing, afraid that if you looked at it too straight on, it would turn out to be something less than what you thought. She woke the next morning to the sound of Cole already moving around, which was not unusual, but also to the sound of something else. a quiet she recognized after a moment as the absence of wind. The storm had passed in the night. She lay still for a moment, listening to Noah breathing in the cradle beside her, and she thought about what she'd understood last night at the stove, and then she got up and started the day. She didn't bring it up at breakfast. She wasn't ready, and she didn't think he was either, and there was work to do. Cole ate quickly and went to check on the bay mare's leg before the light was fully up, and she fed Noah and washed the dishes and did the morning's wood and water. And by the time Cole came back in, she had settled back into the functional rhythm that was how they had always gotten through the days when something larger was sitting in the room with them. "How's the mare?" she asked. "Swollen. She needs a week off her feet, maybe 2. He poured himself coffee, standing at the shelf. "She'll be fine." "Good." He stayed at the shelf instead of sitting. She was aware of it, the slight deviation from his usual pattern, the thing that meant he was working something out. "About last night," he said. "You don't have to—" "I do," he said. He turned around. He was holding the cup in both hands the same way he'd held it last night, and he was looking at her with the focused directness that she'd come to understand was just how he looked at things. He considered serious. "I've been trying to figure out what to say since about midnight." "That explains the bags under your eyes," she said. He almost smiled. Almost. "Yeah." He set the cup down. "I don't do this well. Talking about this kind of thing." "I know, but I don't want to not say it and have you think I didn't notice. What you did last night," he paused. "What you've been doing since you got here." She waited. She was good at waiting, had gotten better at it, living with a man who needed space inside sentences. Clara was the last person who... He stopped, tried again. "After she died, I stopped expecting anyone to... I don't know. Be concerned about whether I came home." He said it plainly, without any attempt to make it more or less than what it was. 3 years of that. You stop expecting it, and then you stop noticing you've stopped expecting it, and it just becomes the way things are. "Cole, I'm not saying it to make you feel sorry for me," he said, a quick clarification, the kind that meant it was something he'd thought about. "I'm saying it because when I came out of those trees last night and saw you there, I didn't know what to do, and I haven't not known what to do in a long time." She looked at him across the kitchen. Noah was on the floor between them, focused on something with a piece of the rope toy, apparently unconcerned with the weight of the conversation above his head. "I told you," she said carefully, "that we weren't ready for certain things yet. That first week." "You did." "I'm not sure that's still true," she said. He was quiet. She could see him taking that in, measuring it. "What changed?" he said. "I rode up a mountain in the dark to find you," she said. "I think that changed it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the kitchen, not fast, not dramatically, just directly, the way he did everything. And he stopped in front of her close enough that she had to look up slightly, and he said, "I need you to tell me straight, not what you think the situation requires, what you actually want." She held his gaze. "I want to stay," she said. "That's what I actually want." "On the ranch?" "Yes." "With me?" "Yes," she said. "With you." Something shifted in his face. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated than relief. The expression of a man who has been carrying a weight so long he'd stopped noticing it and was only now, in the moment of it being lifted, understanding how heavy it had been. He reached up and put one hand along the side of her face, rough palm against her cheek, and she turned into it slightly before she could decide whether to, and he bent down and kissed her. It was not a smooth kiss. His hands were cold, and he misjudged the angle slightly at first, and she was still holding the dish towel she'd been using when he crossed the kitchen, and none of that mattered at all. What mattered was that it was real, careful and real, the kind of thing between two people who had been paying attention to each other for weeks and had too much history now to make it anything less than honest. When he pulled back, they were both quiet for a moment. Noah looked up from his rope toy, apparently sensing a change in the room's atmosphere, looked at both of them, and handed Cole the rope. Cole took it. He looked down at the baby, and his expression did the complicated thing she'd been catching at the edges for weeks, and she could see it clearly now. A man trying to hold something he wasn't sure he was allowed to hold, not trusting yet that it was fully his. "Hey," she said. He looked at her. You're allowed, she said. He understood her. She knew he understood her because she saw it land, saw his jaw tighten briefly with the effort of keeping his face together. And then he crouched down to Noah's level, and he handed the rope back, and Noah grabbed it with both fists and made a sound of satisfaction. The 2 days after that were different in ways that were mostly invisible from the outside. They didn't suddenly talk more. Cole was not transformed into a man who narrated his interior life. She was not transformed into someone who asked him to. The work was the same work, the days had the same shape, but there was something that had been carefully not acknowledged between them that was now simply acknowledged, and it changed the quality of the silence in a way she hadn't quite expected. It made the silence lighter. That was the best way she could describe it. She caught him watching her sometimes, and she didn't look away from it anymore. He caught her watching him, and he didn't pretend he hadn't noticed. Simple things. Not simple to get to, but simple in themselves. He helped with Noah more openly. He had always helped. She had always seen the helps, even when he'd tried to make them look like something else. But now he didn't bother with the subterfuge. He held Noah in the mornings while she got the fire going. He noticed when Noah was working on standing and moved things out of the range of falling. He sat on the floor sometimes in the evening and let Noah use him as a climbing structure, which was apparently what Noah had decided Cole was for. He's going to walk soon, Cole said one evening, watching Noah take 3 determined steps between the chair and the table leg, and then sit down hard and immediately try again. I know. She looked up from her mending. He's been doing that for 2 days. Has he made it further than that, when I'm out? 5 steps yesterday. He made it from the cradle to the wall when he didn't think I was watching. Cole watched Noah try again. Why does he try harder when he thinks no one's watching? Because when he knows I'm watching, he tries to show off, she said, and showing off makes him overconfident and he falls. On his own, he's actually quite careful. Cole considered this. That's very human of him, he said. He is human, she said. For 11 months, he's pretty good at it. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that happened without her planning it, and Cole looked over at her with that expression she was getting used to, the one that meant he was storing something, putting it somewhere he could find it later. I haven't heard you laugh like that before, he said. I haven't had much to laugh at before. He nodded, slowly. No, he said. I don't imagine you have. Chab. 3 days before Christmas, Cole came in at midday with an expression she had come to read as meaning he'd been thinking about something for a while and had finally worked out how to say it. She had learned to give him room when he had that expression, not to start conversations, to let him find his way to it. She put lunch on the table. He sat. He ate about half of what was in front of him before he set his fork down. I need to tell you something, he said. She looked at him. About why I bought your debt, he said. She set her own fork down. All right. He looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, his face was not quite comfortable. It wasn't entirely the reason I told you in town. She had wondered about this. She had wondered about it from the beginning and then filed it somewhere to wait, and had mostly not taken it back out because she had been managing enough without adding that to it. What was the reason? She said. I knew Thomas, he said. Not well. He came through once, 2 years ago, looking for grazing rights on the north pasture. I didn't sell them to him because I didn't think he'd keep the terms. But I met him. He paused. He mentioned he had a wife and a baby coming. She was looking at him steadily. When I came to town that morning and I saw what was happening, he stopped. I'd been in the saloon the night before. I heard Marsh talking about the auction, about you. His jaw tightened. About what he planned to do with the arrangement. She felt something go cold in her, the specific cold of knowing that the thing you'd feared without letting yourself fully name it had been real. And, she said, her voice was flat, and I went back to my hotel room and I had about 6 hours to make a decision. He looked at her directly. I want to be straight with you about this. I didn't write in there on pure principle. I wrote in there because I'd heard what Marsh planned, and I had the money, and I couldn't... He stopped. I couldn't leave it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you could have confronted Marsh or told Pruitt. I thought about that. But I didn't know that Pruitt wouldn't have found a way to make it work for Marsh anyway. The cooperative has a lot of reach in this county. The only thing I was certain would work was buying the debt outright. And bringing me here. I needed help at the ranch. That part was true. But you didn't know me. No, he said. She looked at him for a long time. He let her look. He didn't try to soften it or add to it. You took a chance on a woman you didn't know, she said. You took a chance on a man you didn't know. I didn't have options. I know, he said. That's part of what I couldn't leave. She looked at the table. She looked at Noah, who had fallen asleep in his chair in the particular sudden way of babies who ran out of fuel without warning. I'm not angry, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not angry about any of it. She paused. I just needed to know. I should have told you sooner. You told me now. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. But it counts. She picked up her fork again. Cole. Yeah. Gerald Marsh, she said. What exactly did you hear? His face went harder. Not toward her. The hardness was pointed at something she couldn't see in the room. Enough, he said. She nodded. She ate. She didn't ask for more than that because she had understood enough from a word. And because sitting here in this warm kitchen with Noah asleep in the chair and Cole across from her, she was as far from Gerald Marsh as the mountain could make her. And that was the only answer to Gerald Marsh that she currently required. The day before Christmas Eve, she found him in the barn working on the bay mare's leg with a poultice his neighbor from down the valley had apparently shown him years ago. A mixture she wouldn't have identified individually, but which together smelled sharp and medicinal. He was crouched beside the mare's leg, with the concentration he brought to things he was being careful about, and she stood in the barn doorway and watched him for a moment before he heard her. She's better, he said, not looking up. I can see that. The mare was standing easier, weight distributed more evenly. You've done this before. A few times. Horses and ice don't always work out. He finished wrapping the leg and stood, straightening slowly with the hitch in his knee that was worse in cold weather. He noticed her noticing and didn't comment on it. Is Noah down? Just went to sleep. I have 20 minutes, maybe. He washed his hands at the barn bucket. Was there something? I want to ask you something, she said. And I want an honest answer, not a considerate one. He turned around and leaned against the stall post with his arms crossed, which was his listening posture. All right. The ranch, she said. This life. 11 miles up a mountain road, one neighbor that's not close, winters that last 6 months. She looked around the barn, at the careful organization of it, the tools hung in their places, the hay stacked right, the horses clean and watered. This is what you want. This is not a temporary situation for you. No, he said, it's not. I want to know if you've thought about what it would mean to have a woman here and a child, permanently. She held his gaze. Not just if you've thought about wanting it, if you've thought about what it would actually be. He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone trying to figure out what answer she wanted, the quiet of someone actually thinking. It would be harder, he said, more complicated, more expensive. The kind of noise and disruption I stopped expecting. He paused. It would also be the only thing that's happened in 3 years that made this place feel like something other than somewhere I was waiting. She looked at him. Waiting for what? I don't know, he said. I didn't know until November. She held that. She turned it over. I'm not easy to live with, she said. I have opinions about everything, and I'll tell you what they are. I'll fix things without asking if I think they need fixing. I have a child who is about to start walking and will not stop exploring until he's 40. I know, he said. I'm not Clara, she said carefully. His expression shifted. Not pain, not exactly. Something more like the acknowledgement of a truth he'd already made peace with. I know that too, he said. I'm not asking you to be. I just needed to say it. I know. They stood in the cold barn with the horse between them and the winter light coming through the door behind her, and she thought that this was probably the least romantic location for this kind of conversation that existed in the Montana Territory, and she also thought that it was exactly right for who they were. Two practical people having a practical conversation about something that was not practical at all. All right, she said. All right, he said. She started back toward the house. She heard him follow her out of the barn and pull the door shut, and they walked back through the snow side by side, and he reached over without any particular announcement and took her hand. His hand was still cold from the barn bucket. She held it anyway. Pause. Christmas Eve arrived with a quiet she hadn't expected. She had thought, without quite thinking about it directly, that Christmas would feel like something to get through. Thomas had been dead a month and a half, and the previous Christmas had not been good. She had been 8 months pregnant, and Thomas had been away. One of his ventures, he'd said, and she'd spent Christmas Day alone in a rented room in town, eating cornbread she'd made herself. She had a complicated relationship with the holiday that she hadn't examined too closely. But the morning came in clear and very cold, the sky the deep blue that only happened in Montana in winter. And Noah woke up cheerful in the particular way that meant the tooth that had been making him miserable was through at last. And she went to the kitchen and found that Cole had already been up for an hour, and there was coffee made and the fire was going, and on the kitchen table, next to the usual morning things, there were 2 small packages wrapped in brown paper. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. Cole was at the stove with his back to her. "Coffee's hot," he said. "I see the coffee," she said. Cole. What are those?" He turned around. He had the expression he sometimes got when he'd done something he thought might have been a miscalculation. "I went down last week when you were... I told you I was checking the south fence line." "You told me you were checking the south fence line." "I also went to town." She walked to the table and looked at the packages without touching them. One was small enough to be jewelry or hardware, and one was larger, flat, book-shaped. Both were wrapped with the particular inexpert care of a man who did not wrap things often. "Cole," she said, "you didn't have to..." "I know that." "We haven't talked about..." "I know. Open them." She sat down. She picked up the larger one first. She was aware of him watching her with the same focused attention he gave to things he cared about, which was not always many things, but when it was something, it was entirely. Inside the brown paper was a book, not a new one. The cover was worn, the spine cracked from previous reading, the pages soft at the edges. She turned it over. It was a collection of naturalist essays, observations of American plants and animal life, with detailed illustrations. She opened it to a random page and it fell to a section on high-altitude growing conditions and soil variation. She looked up at him. "You said you read when you could," he said, "and you were planning that garden. I thought..." He stopped. "The bookseller in town said it was a good one. I don't know enough about it to say." "It's perfect," she said, and she meant it in the specific way she meant things, precisely, without decoration. The smaller package was a pair of gloves. Good ones, deerskin, lined with wool, sized correctly for her hands. He must have looked at her hands, or estimated, or both. "Your gloves have a hole in the left palm," he said. "I noticed it in November." She looked at the gloves. She thought about a man who noticed the hole in a woman's glove in November and bought her better ones for Christmas and pretended he was checking the south fence line. "Thank you," she said. She kept her voice even. She was not going to cry over deerskin gloves. She was not that person. She was, it turned out, that person. She turned her face away before he could see it clearly, and she looked at the book in her lap, and she pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes once quickly, and then she was fine. Cole tactfully looked out the window during this. "I didn't get you anything," she said, when she trusted her voice. "You cooked every meal for 6 weeks," he said, "and fixed the chicken coop, and reorganized the entire kitchen." "That was just... I know what it was," he said. "It wasn't nothing." Noah, pulling himself up on the table leg, chose this moment to take 4 steps across open floor, reach the chair, and slap his hand against it with the triumphant expression of someone who had just crossed a continent. He looked at both of them for acknowledgement. "There he goes," Cole said quietly. "There he goes," she agreed. Noah sat down and immediately stood back up and tried it again. Champed. The afternoon of Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire after Noah was down. He had worn himself out on the new enterprise of walking and collapsed into sleep in the middle of the floor, which she had let him do before transferring him to the cradle. And she was reading the naturalist book and Cole had his surveying manual, and it was the same scene as many other evenings, except that it was different. The way everything was different now without the room itself having changed. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When you were in Tennessee, before you came west, what was your life like?" He looked up from the manual. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave to questions that deserved it. Hard, he said. My family didn't have land. We worked other people's land mostly. It was not a life I wanted to spend 60 years in. So you left. I left. He looked at the fire. My mother thought I was throwing away what little security there was. Were you? Probably, for a few years. He turned the manual over in his hands. Then I had this. Do you think she'd understand now, if she could see it? He was quiet for a while. She'd have questions about why I live 11 miles from the nearest neighbor, he said. She was a social person. And your father? He'd want to know if the cattle turned a profit. He almost smiled. He was a practical person. And you? He looked at her. Both, he said. Mostly the practical. But, he paused. I understand now, more than I did when I was young, that practical isn't enough. You can build everything you need and still be, he looked for the word, still be missing the point of it. She thought about this. Thomas thought the point of it was the plan, she said. The next venture, the next opportunity. I think he actually loved the planning more than he would have loved arriving. Did you figure that out while you were married to him? I figured it out after. I think I knew it while, but didn't know what to do with knowing it. Cole nodded slowly. What's the point of it for you? He said. If not the plans. She looked at the fire. She thought about standing on the auction block in the mud. She thought about the ride up the ridge road. She thought about a book with a worn spine and deerskin gloves sized for her hands. This, she said, I think I've been looking for this. A log house on a mountain. A log house on a mountain where I know where everything is, she said, and where the things I do stay done, and where nobody is going to come take it because somebody didn't pay a debt. She paused. And where someone notices when my glove has a hole in it. He looked at her for a long time. Then he put the manual down, and he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and he said, Evelyn. She looked at him. Stay, he said. Not because you don't have anywhere else to go, because you want to be here. I know the difference, she said. I know you do. I'm saying it anyway. He held her gaze. I'm asking you to stay because I want you here. You and Noah both. That's what I'm saying. She looked at him for a moment. I already told you I wanted to stay. That was about the ranch. No, she said, it wasn't. He understood her. She could see him understand her, the way she'd come to be able to read him. The small shift, the thing in his eyes. He reached across the space between the chairs and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it coming back from the barn, without announcement, just a decision made and carried out. She turned her hand over and held his. Outside, the snow had started again, soft this time. Not storm wind, but the gentle falling kind. And the fire was warm and the ranch was quiet, and she was sitting in a chair that was hers now, she realized. Not borrowed, not temporary. Hers in the way that things were yours when you had been willing to ride up a mountain in the dark for them. She didn't know what the spring would look like. She didn't know what the road back to Blackstone Crossing would look like, or what Gerald Marsh would say the next time Cole's name and hers appeared in the same sentence in the county's ears. She didn't know what came next. She had never, in her 23 years, known for certain what came next. But she knew the shape of the hand holding hers, and she knew the sound the pines made in the wind outside this particular house, and she knew where the spare lamp oil was and which stove damper ran hot, and that the north pasture fence was good, and the south needed watching, and that Noah was going to be walking everywhere by the time the snow cleared. She knew enough, more than she'd ever had. She was beginning to understand more than enough. Christmas morning came in silent, not the silence of absence, the silence of everything having settled overnight into exactly the place it was going to be. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, and the world outside the ranch was the particular white stillness that followed a serious snowfall, the kind that muffled sound and smoothed every edge and made the mountains look like something drawn rather than something real. Evelyn woke before Noah for once, which almost never happened. She lay still in the gray early light and listened to him breathing in the cradle, even and slow. The deep breathing of a child who had exhausted himself with the discovery of walking and had slept it off completely. And she looked at the ceiling of the back room, and she thought about the fact that it was Christmas, and she was alive and warm and fed, and that those three things together were not nothing. A year ago, she would not have put those 3 things on a list of things to be grateful for because they would have seemed too obvious. That was before the rented room and Thomas's debts and the auction block and the 40 cents. You learned what you'd been taking for granted by losing it, and she had learned, in approximately 6 weeks on a mountain, a thorough accounting of what she actually required to feel like a person rather than a problem to be managed. She got up quietly. She wrapped herself in the heavy shawl she'd hung on the peg by the door, and she went to the kitchen. Cole had already been up. The fire was going, which meant he'd been up for at least an hour, which was his way on normal days and apparently on Christmas too. She heard him outside, the sound of boots on the porch boards, and when she looked through the window, she could see him standing at the porch rail, looking at the snow-covered valley below the ranch, coffee cup in hand, doing what she'd come to recognize as his version of thinking, the standing still kind, which was not the same as not doing anything. She made more coffee and she took a cup outside. He heard her coming and shifted slightly to make room at the rail without looking. She stood beside him and they looked at the valley together. The snow had filled in the creek bed and softened the fence lines and made the whole landscape a study in 3 colors, white and gray, and the dark green-black of the pines. The sky was beginning to go pink at the eastern edge. "Merry Christmas," she said. "Merry Christmas," he said. He was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to make a particular kind of cake on Christmas morning. I haven't thought about it in years." "What kind?" "Cornmeal, with dried fruit in it when she had the fruit." He drank his coffee. "She'd started the night before. I could smell it when I woke up." She looked at his profile in the early light. "Did you have brothers and sisters?" "2 brothers, both younger." He paused. "Silas died of fever when he was 9. Randall's in Missouri somewhere. We lost track." He said it without particular emotion, not because he didn't have any, but because the distance was too long and too old to carry across every morning. "You?" "A sister. Ellen. She married a man in Illinois and we wrote for a while and then we didn't." She looked at the valley. "I should find her again." "You should," he said. "When the road clears in spring, I'll have to go to town to send a letter anyway." She paused. "We'll need things before spring. I've been making a list." He looked at her with mild amusement. "I know you've been making a list. I've seen it on the kitchen shelf." "It's not finished yet." "I didn't say it was." She drank her coffee. The pink at the eastern edge was spreading, getting more serious about itself. "Noah's going to wake up soon," she said. "He won't understand Christmas, but he'll enjoy the attention." "I have something for him," Cole said. She looked at him. "Cole?" "It's not much," he said, with the slightly defensive tone he got when he thought he'd miscalculated something. "It doesn't need to be anything. It's in the barn. I'll get it after breakfast." He looked at the sunrise. "I made it." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. A man who had spent 3 years alone on a mountain had made something with his hands for a baby's Christmas. She did not say what she thought about that. She just held it alongside the deerskin gloves and the naturalist book and the cradle that had been waiting 6 years in a back room, and she let the picture they made together sit in her chest where she kept the things that mattered. Breakfast was bigger than usual because it was Christmas, and she made it bigger on purpose. Eggs and salt pork and the good cornmeal, biscuits she'd started the night before, and baked first thing while Cole was outside. Noah woke up during the biscuits, his radar for food apparently fully operational even at 13 months, and he was bright-eyed and mobile and testing his new walking ability on every surface the kitchen offered. Cole brought the thing from the barn after they ate while she was clearing the dishes, and he set it on the kitchen floor with the slightly careful manner of a man who had made something he wasn't sure of. It was a small wooden horse. Rough, not the polished, perfect wooden toys that came from a store, but clearly a horse, with 4 legs and a mane suggested by a line of cut notches along the neck and a tail of twisted twine. The wood had been sanded enough that there were no splinters, and it was the right size for a baby's hands. Noah looked at it. He looked at Cole. He looked at the horse. He picked it up in both hands and immediately tried to put it in his mouth, which was his standard evaluation method for new objects. He's just assessing it," Evelyn said. "I know what he's doing," Cole said. He crouched down to Noah's level. "That's a horse," he said to Noah. "You've seen the real ones. This one's yours." Noah held the wooden horse up and looked at it closely. then held it out to Cole as if offering it for inspection, then pulled it back, then held it out again. "He wants you to look at it," Evelyn said. Cole took the horse, looked at it seriously, turned it over. "Good horse," he said, and handed it back. Noah accepted this verdict and went back to the business of examining it himself. Cole stood up and his knee made the sound it made in cold weather, and Evelyn didn't comment on it. "You made that last night," she said. "Started it a week ago," he said. "I'm slow with fine work." "It's not rough," she said. "It's rough." "It's handmade," she said. "That's different from rough." He looked at her. She looked at him. "All right," he said. "Datem." The week between Christmas and the New Year was the deepest winter the ranch would see. The road down the mountain was not passable. Not impassable from one snowfall, but from the accumulation of a season, the road existing now as a suggestion under 4 feet of packed snow and ice, a thing you knew was there the way you knew certain truths without being able to see them directly. They were, by any practical measure, cut off. She had expected to feel that more. The confinement. The walls. She had lived in small spaces and isolated situations, and she knew what cabin fever felt like. The particular grating quality of too much closeness with not enough outside to balance it. It didn't come. She thought about why. In the quiet hours while Noah slept and Cole was reading and the fire was doing what fires did. The isolation wasn't new. She'd been essentially isolated for 6 weeks already, and the road being formally impassable was different only in degree. But she thought it was also something else. She thought it was that she had never been isolated with someone who gave her room to be herself before. Thomas had not been cruel, but he had been needy in the specific way of a man who required constant affirmation of his plans. And before Thomas there had been her mother's house, and the Cooley household, and various other spaces where she had been useful to people who needed her useful. Cole did not need her to be anything except what she was. He was indifferent to her opinions until he wanted them, and then he wanted them actually, not as performance. He did not require management. She did not have to be careful around him in the way that used up energy. She realized one gray January afternoon, rested. Actually rested. Not the fake rest of lying still while your mind ran, but something underneath it, some level she hadn't reached in years. It frightened her a little, how much she'd needed it. The trouble came in the second week of January, and it came in the form of a rider on the road. Cole saw him first from the window, a single rider coming up through the lower section of the road, which meant the road was becoming passable again, which was both practical information and, in this case, unwelcome information. "Who is it?" she said, coming to look. "I don't know yet." He watched. "He's coming steady, not in trouble." The rider turned out to be a man named Garrett, a county deputy she'd never met, but that Cole apparently knew by sight. He came up to the porch, and he was cold and businesslike about it, which she understood meant he was doing something he didn't entirely like. "Maddox," he said. "Garrett." Cole was on the porch. She was in the doorway behind him. "Long ride." "It is." The deputy looked past Cole to her briefly. "Mrs. Harper." "What's this about?" Cole said. His voice had gone to the flat, careful register she recognized as the one he used when he was managing something. "Gerald Marsh filed a complaint with the county," Garrett said. He said it like a man pulling a splinter, just wanting to get it over with. "About the proceedings in November. He says there's a question of whether Maddox's intervention was legally proper under the debt satisfaction statutes." She felt her stomach go tight. "That's what he says," Cole said. "County clerk's been asked to review the record." Garrett looked uncomfortable. "I'm not here to make trouble, Cole. I'm here because I was told to come. I'm supposed to advise Mrs. Harper that she may be required to appear at a county proceeding in the spring regarding the legal validity of the obligation discharge." She stepped out onto the porch. "Gerald Marsh wants to reopen it," she said. Garrett looked at her. He had the expression of a man who knew more than he was saying and felt bad about it. "The complaint was filed by the cooperative as an entity," he said carefully. "Marsh is a board member." "He's more than a board member," she said. "He was the high bidder." Garrett didn't deny this. He also didn't confirm it, which was its own kind of confirmation. "What happens at the proceeding?" Cole said. "Clerk reviews whether the debt was properly discharged. If he finds it was, and Cole, I think he will, because you paid in full and there's nothing in the statute that prevents that, then it's over. If he finds some procedural issue, Garrett stopped. Then it's not over, Cole finished. Then there may be further proceedings. He looked at both of them. I'd recommend you have someone who knows the law take a look at it before spring. Cole nodded. I know someone in Millerton. I'll write to him. That would be wise. Garrett settled his hat. I'm sorry to bring this on Christmas week. It's January, Cole said. Right. The deputy turned his horse. I'll tell the clerk you've been advised. He rode back down. She and Cole stood on the porch until the rider was gone. Then Cole said, Come inside. They sat at the table. Noah was in the back room, napping, which she was grateful for because she needed 5 minutes to think without managing a toddler simultaneously. He's not going to stop, she said. No, Cole agreed. He's using the cooperative as a vehicle because he can't file a personal complaint without it looking like what it is. Yes. And what it is, she said, is a man who didn't get what he bid on and has enough local influence to cause problems about it. Cole looked at the table. His jaw was doing the thing it did when he was containing something. He could cause problems, he said. Depends on the clerk. Depends on how the law reads. I don't know every piece of it, which is why I need someone who does. Who's the someone in Millerton? A lawyer. His name is Aldridge. He handled a land dispute for me 4 years ago. Cole looked up. He's good. And he's not in Marsh's pocket because Marsh tried to get him in his pocket 2 years ago over something and Aldridge told him to go to hell, more or less. She felt something ease slightly. I want to be present at any proceeding, she said. I'm not going to be the subject of a legal proceeding and sit at home. I wouldn't suggest otherwise. Thomas's debts were legitimately discharged. Pruitt counted the money himself. I know. Then Marsh has no case. He may not need a case, Cole said. His voice was careful. He needs delay. He needs the thing to be uncertain long enough to... I don't know what he thinks the outcome is, but men like Marsh don't do things without an angle. She thought about it. If the proceeding drags on, she said slowly, and it becomes county gossip that my status here is legally uncertain, then your position here is socially uncertain, Cole said, which is what he wants. He wants to make the situation uncomfortable enough that it changes. She looked at Cole directly. What would change it, she said. Legally. What would make my position here unambiguous? He looked at her. He understood what she was asking. He had understood it before she finished asking it. She could see that, but he took a moment before he answered. Marriage, he said. If you were married to me, you'd be Mrs. Maddox on Maddox land, and there's no statute and no cooperative complaint that touches that. Is that the reason you'd want it? She said. Because I need to know if that's the reason. No, he said immediately. No hesitation. It's not the reason. Then say the reason. He looked at her across the table with all the contained directness he was capable of, which was a great deal. Because I want you here, he said. Because Noah's going to walk across this floor every day for the next 17 years, and I want to be the person he walks toward. Because last night I woke up at 3 a.m. and I thought about what this house was like before November, and I don't want to go back to that. He stopped. That's the reason. Marsh is the thing that made me say it before I'd worked out how to say it properly. She sat with that for a moment. It was not a speech. It was not romantic in the way she'd been told when she was young that these things were supposed to be. It was a man sitting at a kitchen table in January telling her the truth about what he wanted because he was constitutionally unable to tell her anything else. She had been offered smooth things before. Thomas had been very smooth. Yes, she said. He looked at her. Yes, she said again. That's my answer. Something moved in his face. A shift. A loosening, like a door that had been shut for a long time opening just a little. He reached across the table and she put her hand in his. They sat like that for a minute in the January quiet. And then Noah woke up in the back room and made the sound that meant he was done being alone. And Cole got up and went to get him. And she heard Cole's voice through the door talking to Noah in the low, easy way he'd developed over the past 2 months. And she sat at the table and she put both her hands flat against the wood. And she breathed. Cole wrote to Aldridge in Millerton the next day. The letter took 3 drafts, which she knew because she found the first 2 in the kindling box where he'd thrown them, and she read them and understood why he'd discarded them. Too aggressive on the first, too uncertain on the second. The third one she didn't read, but it went with the next rider going down the mountain, and 3 weeks later Aldridge wrote back. The letter was 4 pages. She and Cole read it at the kitchen table, passing pages back and forth, with Noah working on his walking laps around the room behind them. The legal analysis was thorough and, ultimately, not alarming. Aldridge's position was that the November proceedings had been entirely valid. Payment in full was payment in full, and the territorial statute was unambiguous on that point. Marcia's complaint, Aldridge thought, had little legal merit. The risk was not the law, but the clerk, a man named Hoskins who had, Aldridge noted with careful language, a long association with the Blackstone Crossing Merchants Cooperative. Hoskins is the problem, she said. Hoskins is one problem, Cole said. Aldridge thinks he can be handled. How? By showing up with more legal weight than Marsh expects. Cole turned to the last page. Aldridge wants to file a preemptive motion establishing the validity of the discharge before the spring proceeding. Forces Hoskins to respond to our argument instead of Marsh's. She looked at the letter. That's expensive. Yes. Cole, don't, he said, not unkindly. It's not a conversation about money. It's a conversation about whether this gets resolved or whether it hangs over us for a year. She looked at him. He was right, and she knew he was right. And she was still not entirely comfortable with the architecture of it, with being the person on whose behalf money was spent and decisions were made. She had managed her own affairs for too long, imperfectly, with too few resources to find it easy. We write back to Aldridge, she said finally. Together. I want to be part of this. I assumed you would be, he said. They wrote back to Aldridge together, which meant that she wrote most of it, and Cole reviewed it and added 3 sentences that were legally precise in a way she recognized as coming from the land dispute 4 years ago. He'd kept more of that experience than he'd said. The letter went down the mountain with the next rider. And then they waited, the way you waited for things in winter. Not passively, not helplessly, but with the steady patience of people who had a great deal of daily work between them and the thing they were waiting for. February announced itself with a cold snap that froze the creek solid for the first time that winter, and with Noah taking his first fully unassisted lap around the entire main room without sitting down once, which he celebrated by sitting down hard next to Cole's boot and looking up at Cole for acknowledgement. Cole said, "But, good," in exactly the voice he used for everything he considered well done, and Noah accepted this and tried it again in the other direction. She watched this from the kitchen and thought about how that word had changed for her. Good. How she had learned to hear the actual weight of it coming from a man who did not use words for decoration. When Cole said something was good, he meant it had met the standard. Coming from him, that was not a small thing. The days had a quality she kept trying to name and couldn't quite. Not happiness exactly, because happiness was a word that felt too bright for what she actually felt, too clean. What she felt was more like solidity, like a structure that had been completed and was now load-bearing. The uncertainty of the first weeks was gone, and what had replaced it was not certainty exactly, because nothing on a mountain ranch in February was certain, but something like groundedness, like knowing where you stood. She had not known where she stood in years. She and Cole were married on a Saturday in February, in the ranch house, with no ceremony beyond what they made themselves. There was no preacher available, and the road was still difficult, and neither of them had wanted to wait for better weather or a larger occasion. She had worn her better dress, and he had worn his better coat, and Noah had been briefly interested and then thoroughly more interested in the wooden horse. And the words they said to each other were not formal words. They were the words of 2 people who had already agreed to a thing and were now saying so plainly to the other, the way you said anything plain that you meant entirely. Afterward, she had cooked a better-than-usual supper, and Cole had opened the bottle of whiskey she hadn't known he'd been keeping, and they had sat by the fire with 2 tin cups and Noah asleep in the back room. And it was not so different from any other evening, except that it was entirely different, in the way that form sometimes changes everything, even when the substance stays the same. "Mrs. Maddox," Cole said, with a slight testing quality, as if trying out how it sat. "Don't make it strange," she said. "I'm not making it strange. You're saying it like you're not sure it's real." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not entirely sure it's real," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire, the cup in both hands, wearing the expression she'd first seen on Christmas morning. the one of a man who had been handed something he hadn't thought he'd get again and wasn't quite sure how to hold it without being afraid. "It's real," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Bang! March brought the first indication that Aldridge's strategy was working. A letter arrived, forwarded up from town by a cooperative writer from the county clerk's office in sparse official language stating that Hoskins had reviewed the preemptive motion and found the discharge of the Harper debt to be properly executed under territorial law. The complaint filed by the Blackstone Crossing Merchants Cooperative was dismissed. She read it 3 times. Then she set it on the table and went to the window. It was a clear March day, the sky the thin clear blue of early spring, and the snow line had retreated up the mountain slope 100 feet since February. She could see the creek from the window, running again, the ice broken, the water moving. The south side of the house, where the sun hit earliest, had a bare patch of earth that was the first ground she'd seen since November. That was where she was going to put the garden. She heard Cole come in from outside, and she heard him pick up the letter from the table, and she heard the silence as he read it. "Dismissed," he said. "Dismissed," she confirmed. He set the letter down. She turned around. He was standing at the table with one hand on the letter, and an expression she could only describe as relieved without looking relieved. A man whose guard had been up for months settling back down without ceremony. "Aldridge will want to be paid," Cole said. "Yes, we'll pay him." "And Marsh lost," she said. "Men like Marsh lose sometimes. They don't handle it well, but they lose. He won't be friendly. He wasn't friendly before." She looked at Cole. "I'm going to need to go to town in spring to send that letter to Ellen, and I want to go. I'm not going to avoid Blackstone Crossing because Gerald Marsh is unpleasant." Cole looked at her with the expression she had come to love most, the one that was not quite a smile, but was what happened in him when she did something that confirmed what he'd already believed. "I know you're not," he said. "I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. "That's different." She held his gaze. "Yes," she said. "It is." Spring came in stages, the way it came in the mountains. Not a single arrival, but a gradual negotiation between winter and everything else. Ground appearing and then disappearing under late snow and then appearing again. The creek rising with melt. The cattle coming down from wherever they'd been working through the high elevation snow and needing attention. The work tripled in March and April, the way it always tripled at the end of winter on any working land. Every deferred repair and needed replacement coming due at once. She worked alongside Cole in a way she hadn't entirely during the winter months, when the cold had made division of labor more practical. She inside, he outside, meeting in the evenings. Spring undid that division. She was out in the early mornings checking the south garden plot she'd been turning since the first bare earth appeared, working in the compost she'd been building since December, into the soil that was dark and cold, and she thought better than she'd expected for the elevation. She was out in the afternoons helping with fence repair, holding posts while Cole drove them, fetching tools and wire, doing the 100 small jobs that surrounded the large ones. Noah learned to walk on uneven ground. He was not graceful about it. He went down 4 or 5 times a day, scraped both knees repeatedly on the gravel near the barn, developed a thick callus of determination about falling that she recognized as something he had not gotten from his father. He would fall, and he would look at what he'd fallen on, and he would get up and try it again at the same pace, as if falling were merely data to be incorporated. Cole watched this with an attention she recognized as the beginning of something longer. He said very little to Noah directly. He wasn't a man who narrated or performed, but he was present in a way that was specific and real, not the abstract presence of someone who knew there was a child in the room, but the presence of someone tracking a particular child. He noticed what Noah was working on. He modified the environment around it without comment. He moved the sharper tools from the lower barn shelf without being asked. He added a lower rung to the ladder on the porch side so Noah could practice the up and down that he was obsessed with. He made a second wooden horse because the first one had been loved to the point of structural compromise. She saw all of this. She did not make it a conversation unless he made it a conversation, which was rarely, but she held it in the way she held everything about him, carefully, in a place she could find it when she needed it. One afternoon in April, she was at the south garden plot, and Noah was with her, which was more of a challenge than a help since his contribution to gardening consisted primarily of redistributing soil from one place to another for his own reasons. And Cole came past with a fence post on his shoulder and stopped. He looked at the garden. She'd got 3 rows in: a turnip row, a kale row, and what she hoped would be a bean row if she could get the seedlings she'd been starting inside established before the last frost. "You said the beans might work if you started them inside early enough," he said. "I did say that." "And?" "And I'm optimistic," she said. "The seedlings look good. We'll know in 2 weeks whether the soil's warm enough." He studied the rows. She had put in more than he'd expected. She could see that. "That's a lot of work," he said. "It'll be more work when it grows," she said. "But it'll also be food, so—" He looked at her. "You're planning to still be here when it comes up," he said. It was not a question. It was the thing underneath a question, stated plainly. "I'm planning to still be here when you're old enough that your knee gives you real trouble," she said, "which, based on current evidence, is sooner than later. So yes, I'm planning to be here." He looked at her with that expression, the one she'd first seen glimpses of on the barn floor with Noah, the one that came out more fully now, the one she thought was probably what he looked like when he let himself believe that good things stayed. "The bean rows need more space," he said. "They spread." "I know they spread. I left space." "That's not enough space." "Cole, I have grown beans. I know how much space beans need." "You grew beans in Nebraska. These are mountain beans." She stared at him. "Mountain beans. The elevation changes things. Beans are beans. I'm just saying, you're saying you want to be involved in the garden," she said. He stopped. He considered this. "Maybe," he said. "You can be involved in the garden," she said. "I'll add 4 inches to the bean row spacing." 6, he said. 5, she said. He almost smiled. He picked up his fence post and kept walking. She turned back to the soil. She was smiling too, at the ground, where he couldn't see it. She let herself have that. She wrote to Ellen in April, when the road was fully clear and Cole took her to town, as he'd said he would. The letter was 3 pages, which was longer than she'd intended, but there was a great deal to account for, and she found, sitting at the desk in the Blackstone Crossing post office, that she didn't want to be efficient about it. She wanted her sister to know. She told Ellen about Thomas briefly and honestly. She told her about the debt and the auction, also briefly, without drama. The facts were dramatic enough on their own. She told her about Cole more carefully, the way you told someone about something you weren't sure you had the right words for yet. She wrote, "He is not an easy man to know, and he was not an easy situation to walk into, and I will not tell you it has all been simple because it has not. But I have a kitchen and a garden and a room where my son sleeps in a cradle that was waiting for him, and there is a man in the next room who noticed my glove had a hole in it. That is more than I had. That is, I think, what I was looking for and did not know how to name." She sent the letter. She did not know if Ellen would write back. She thought she would. She hoped she would. Gerald Marsh did not come out of the feed and grain when she and Cole walked past it on their way back to the wagon. She saw him through the window, standing near the counter, and she saw him see her, and he looked away first. Cole didn't look at the window at all. "Did you see—" she started. "Yes," he said. He looked away first. "I know." She took his arm on the main street of Blackstone Crossing, the same mud street where she had stood on a platform 4.5 months ago, and she held it. And they walked to the wagon, and Cole helped her up, and they drove back up the mountain road. The same road she had first come down in a supply wagon in November, not knowing what she was agreeing to. And she watched the town fall away behind them, and the pines close in on either side, and the road climb toward the ranch. Noah was asleep against her shoulder, heavy the way sleeping children were heavy, all their usual restless energy temporarily absent. Cole drove. He watched the road the way he always watched it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "When you rode into town that morning in November," she said, "when you paid the debt, what did you think was going to happen?" He drove for a moment before he answered. "I didn't think past the moment," he said. "I don't usually plan that far when I'm doing something like that." "Something like what?" "Something that feels necessary," he said. When something feels necessary, I usually just do it and figure out the rest after. She thought about this. I did the same thing, she said. On the Ridge Road. He glanced at her. Yeah, he said. I know. They drove in silence for a while. The pines moved in the spring wind and the road was muddy in the lower sections and solid with old snow higher up, and the ranch was 11 miles away and entirely theirs. She had come from nothing, less than nothing, from a debt and a platform, and a man she didn't know offering her a ride up a mountain. She had not chosen any of the conditions of that beginning. Nobody chose the conditions of their beginnings. You chose what you did with them, and sometimes you chose right, and sometimes you chose badly, and sometimes you just chose forward because forward was the only direction with anything in it. She had chosen forward in November with 40 cents and a baby and no plan, and it had brought her here, to a road she knew, to a man beside her who noticed holes in gloves, to a ranch with a south-facing garden plot, and a cradle that was being used, and a kitchen that was hers, and a deed that had her name on it now beside his. It had not been smooth. It had been cold and frightening and uncertain, and she had shaken privately in chairs for 2 minutes at a time when things got to be too much. None of it had resolved the way you read about in the kind of stories she'd read as a girl, where everything arrived together in a moment and was suddenly clear. It had resolved the way real things resolved, piece by piece, day by day, through work and proximity, and the slow accumulation of moments when two people chose to be honest with each other instead of careful. That was not as dramatic as a single moment. It was harder, and it lasted longer, and she thought it was worth considerably more. Noah shifted in her arms and made a sound and settled. Cole's shoulder was warm against hers on the wagon bench. The mountain went up ahead of them, and at the top of it the ranch waited, and in 2 weeks she would know whether the beans had taken. She was not afraid of 2 weeks. She had never been afraid of the work. She was, for the first time in a very long time, interested in what came next. Not anxious about it, not braced for it, but actually interested, the way you were interested in things when you had a foundation solid enough to stand on while you watched them come. That was the thing nobody told you when you were young and frightened and counting your resources and finding them too small. That the foundation didn't have to be perfect, it just had to hold. The cracks and the rough joints and the fence posts that needed watching, all of that was real and all of that was hers. It held. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything.